What we don't know yet is how far Trump is going to push this. Does he get into an arm wrestle? Does he go to heck in a handbasket?
Or does he join Linda McMahon in the ring?
Oh, who's the worst now, Mom? Who's the worst now? Who's the worst now? Oh, that's just too bad. Who's the worst now? Who's the worst now?
The woman's voice that you hear in that clip is Linda McMahon. She is a former wrestler. She is the co-founder of World Wrestling Entertainment, what used to be known as WWE before the old pandas got in the way. And she is now the President-elect's pick for Education Secretary.
Given the other nominations that we've heard for kind of these key critical roles, you might think it's all of a par. But Donald Trump is remorselessly going around assembling his team. But to think that they are all one camp is not quite right. There are divergences within which will make it seem like there is a coalition government being formed. Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily. And let's introduce you a bit more to Linda McMahon because she is quite formidable. Really. I mean,
you wouldn't want to get in the ring with her.
I wouldn't want to get in any ring with anyone, but she does seem to know what she's doing. But she was made part of the transition team in August. Obviously, there is sometimes a correlation between amounts donated and roles then given out. But she's handed out, I think, some $800,000 to Trump's campaign team. That was, from 6 months ago. And she has chaired, more importantly, the America First Action Super PAC. So this is the PAC that puts the kind of structure in place to help get him elected, to help sort out the funding for him. And she's been in a previous administration with him. She's essentially somebody that he trusts and wants to have on board by his side. But she will now be in charge of education. And her first thought on this is hand education back to the states. Let them choose. Which gives you a very piecemeal sense of what education could mean in any of the 50 states of the US, including which books are allowed, which literatures are allowed, what kids are allowed to learn at school.
Whether there's any separation between church and state.
All that.
And Donald Trump has made clear that what he wants to see is the dismantling of the education department. I mean, She's essentially going in there with a mandate to blow the place up.
Yes.
And for
we Mums for Liberty.
Yeah, we don't need a
talk.
federal education thing. We just need to have local schools making local decisions and parents in control of education. And given her unorthodox background, you would think, oh, well, she's just another crazy that's going to be inside the Trump White House. I'm not sure that's quite right. I mean, she ran the Small Business Administration in his first term, so she's been around.
Yeah, she has also been named in a lawsuit, actually, involving WWE, which alleges that she and other leaders of the company allowed the sexual abuse of young boys at the hands of a ringside announcer. She has denied this. She said the allegations are false, but she will become part of a pattern, as you will hear shortly, of potential presidential picks who have all been followed by sexual abuse claims or allegations.
Well, this is the most extraordinary part about. If you're looking for common themes, you could go for the theme that, oh my God, they're all nutty whack jobs. Actually, you have got the future pick as Defence Secretary, Peter Hegseth, who has faced allegations against him.
He's denied them, but he has paid a woman off.
Yeah. Matt Gaetz, there is a bulging file on, which we are not going to see the light of day of, even though the House has been investigating it and has decided it would be improper for us to know whether there are serious drug allegations against him and sexual abuse allegations.
Yeah, I mean, for context, the FBI investigated him and didn't find enough evidence of a crime to arrest him. But the House Ethics Committee then took on this investigation, and they were investigating sex parties at which it was alleged he had sex with underage girls, women, and the illicit use of drugs, both of which he's denied. And I think this is where, in a sense, the story gets interesting, because there will be question marks hanging over how his colleagues, or how senators, how those who want to please Donald Trump now act. Will they decide that he is a step too far? Will they decide that if Donald Trump wants it, Donald Trump shall have it? Will they hand over to the Ethics Committee and say, well, why don't you get your report out and then we can all make our minds up? And I think, you know, as we used to say, there are plenty of shivers in the room looking for a spine to crawl up.
Completely. And the complexity of the calculation that each of those senators is going to make is going to hinge on when are they up for re-election.
Yeah.
If they're up for re-election in 2 years' time, do you want to incur the wrath of Donald Trump by saying we need to see this report before
we decide? Or are
we
you
decide
going to see him out?
Or if you're not facing election now
for 6 years,
for 6 years, you think, oh well, Trump's going to be gone by then. Or if I'm not running again, screw Donald Trump. And those will be the kind of complexity.
You haven't mentioned morals or ethics at all at this point, but
have I forgotten that?
You've forgotten that.
Yes, but we have to mention as well, don't we, in the context of all this, that the person who is the president-elect was found against by E. Jean Carroll and had to pay millions of dollars.
Found liable for rape.
Yes, found liable for rape. It was a civil trial, it wasn't a criminal trial. But we also know that Donald Trump has spoken in terms about grabbing women by the pussy, which was what came out just before the 2016 presidential election.
So we're guessing that sexual abuse allegations not particularly high up on the list.
No.
Not a deterrent.
It's not a disqualifier in itself.
No.
But the Matt Gaetz thing is unbelievable in that he could be the next Attorney General and people are saying, wow, do we really want to know whether he misused drugs or trafficked young women? No. It's a pretty extraordinary thing to be in the position of.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, any of the senators who have to be part of that process of confirming these picks are out doing the airwaves now. Most of them are trying very hard not to say anything at all, but some of them are putting their money where their mouth is. And this is Senator Mullen from Oklahoma.
I think the president wants a hammer at the DOJ, and he sees Matt Gaetz as a hammer and all these other appointments. He's very confident in where they're at and can deliver the administration that he's wanting. His picks have been maybe unconventional, but we hired an unconventional president, and the American people wanted that. They don't want politics as usual. They want someone that's going to shake up Washington, D.C., and President Trump proved he could do that in 2016, and we've had great results with the economy that followed. The American people saw what happened underneath the Biden administration, and it went to I'm going to use good words here. It went to heck in a handbasket. And then we see where the American people said, we're tired of that. We want something different. So the American people want it to be shook up. And the president is maybe using some picks for these positions that's not conventional, but it's what the American people wanted.
There's a lot of kind of nice language. Not conventional, sort of glosses over the fact that Matt Gaetz, I mean, I think a hammer is a really good sort of analogy, smashing the place up, you know, going after the people that Donald Trump wants going after and freeing the people in prison that were part of the January the 6th riots. So that's kind of where Gaetz, or Trump is positioning Gaetz as being the person that, smashes the place up.
And what we don't know yet is how far Trump is going to push this. Does he get into an arm wrestle? Does he go to heck in a handbasket?
Or does he join Linda McMahon in the ring?
Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, this is one of those ones where of all the people that have been nominated so far, and there's a kind of great debate to be had on which is the wackiest of the nominations that Donald Trump has made. But Matt Gaetz seems to me to be the one. Is Donald Trump prepared to die in the last ditch to get him over the line? There was a famous occasion when there was the Veteran Affairs Department vacancy came up in the last administration. And he tried to push his own physician, White House physician, who'd never run anything, to be the head of the Veterans Affairs Department, Ronnie Jackson. And Ronnie Jackson was hopelessly ill-equipped to be that person. And Donald Trump kept on pushing him, and eventually had to accept that he was never going to get that appointment over the line.
Well, it's interesting.
Will Matt Gaetz be different?
Yeah, and maybe Matt Gaetz is meant to be where your eye is drawn, so you take your eye off all the other appointments. I mean, when you're talking about losers, it's quite interesting. Linda McMahon has stood twice for the Senate in Connecticut and lost. And the other person that Donald Trump has now sort of signalled he wants to have in the cabinet is Mehmet Oz, who was the man standing for the Republican Senate position in Pennsylvania against John Fetterman, the kind of the tattooed guy who had the stroke, who then beat him. And I don't know whether you'll remember this, but this felt like the moment in 2022 when Mehmet Oz's chances went to hell in a handbasket. He tries to talk about inflation in the supermarket and ends up talking about crudités.
I do some grocery shopping. I'm at Wegner's, and my wife wants some vegetables for crudité, right? So here's a broccoli. That's $2. Not a ton of broccoli there. Here's some asparagus. That's $4. Yep. Carrots. That's $4 more. That's $10 of vegetables there. And then we need some guacamole. That's $4 more. And she loves salsa. Yeah, there's salsa there. $6. Must be a shortage of salsa. Guys, that's $20 for crudité, and this doesn't include the tequila. I mean, that's outrageous.
But you might remember him from his TV appearances at Oprah, where he was basically peddling quackery, slimming pills, and he's now wanted in the Department of Health.
Yeah,
of course.
With RFK Jr.
Right.
And this is where it gets interesting. There are people on the Democratic Party side who are talking up RFK Jr. The governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, who I've heard people say to me in Washington, watch this guy, he could be a future presidential candidate. Jared Polis has come out and spoken up in favour of RFK with some of the ideas that he's got about breaking up Big Pharma and kind of prescription prices and all the rest of it. You know, again, it's anti-establishment. And it's a question for the Democratic Party of whether they are going to embrace that. Cory Booker has also spoken up about RFK's appointment. So to the people that you're thinking they are absolutely out there are bits of Democratic Party support.
I just think it's really weird with the RFK thing because without sort of going down the watch clock stuff, you know, of course there'll be things that RFK says, like he doesn't like mass processed food. There was that really extraordinary photograph of him being Trump Force One being made to eat at McDonald's, which looked like just basic bullying. The guy hates processed food. Of course you can get behind that. Of course you can go, oh, maybe we should look again at processed food in America. Maybe we should look at the obesity problem. But stand back for a moment and say, you know, when you hate Big Pharma and you're anti-vax, it's all very well to say, oh, yeah, we want to break up the monopolies of the giants who, you know, charge too much on drugs. I mean, to be honest, the Democrats spend a lot of time talking about bringing down the price of insulin in this campaign, which they actually did. But breaking up Big Pharma and being anti-vax just sounds like a recipe for a measles outbreak, quite frankly.
It is head-spinning, some of the stuff that is now being talked about. And because Trump has won so convincingly and has control of both houses, he's effectively got control of the Supreme Court, he's going to be in the White House. What you're finding now is people trying to seek an accommodation with what a Trump presidency will look like. And I think this is a really interesting psychological shift that you're seeing taking place. And there is a TV breakfast show called Morning Joe. It's on MSNBC and it's fronted by Joe Scarborough, who was a former Republican congressman but who's been on a journey, and Mika Brzezinski, who is the daughter of Zbig Brzezinski, who was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. So kind of real part of the Democratic Party establishment. In the run-up to the 2016 election, they were all over Trump like a cheap rash, and he would ring into Morning Joe and they would put him straight on the air and he'd ramble on for 20 minutes, and they thought it was great for ratings that Donald...
This was 8 years ago.
This was 8 years ago. They then decided they absolutely hated Donald Trump and that he was a liar, and they competed with each other to who could call him the biggest liar.
Yeah, and Hitler, I think, as well.
Yeah, and Hitler-like and all the rest of it. Every day it was the same menu of bill of fare that you got with Morning Joe breakfast. And it turns out that in the past week, guess what? Where have they been? They've been to Mar-a-Lago to see Donald Trump.
Let's listen to it through Mika's own words.
For those asking why we would go speak to the president-elect during such fraught times, especially between us, I guess I would ask back, why wouldn't we? 5 years of political warfare has deeply divided Washington and the country. We have been as clear as we know how in expressing our deep concerns about President Trump's actions and words in the coarsening of public debate. But for nearly 80 million Americans, election denialism, public trials, and January 6th were not as important as the issues that moved them to send Donald Trump back to the White House with their vote. Joe and I realize it's time to do something different. And that starts with not only talking about Donald Trump, but also talking with him.
And I guess that is the right question. Why wouldn't you? I don't know how they position themselves or see themselves. If you are still thinking of yourself as a journalist or a reporter, you meet anyone, right? You know, I mean, I would go and interview Putin. If I was offered the chance to meet Putin, of course I'd say yes, right? And so from there downwards, wouldn't you meet anyone who gave you the chance to meet them? So I don't really get why there is so much pushback on this.
I will try and say why I think there is such outrage. I mean, one, they've got a very liberal audience, and so the liberal audience will see it as a betrayal. But I leave that to one side. I think it speaks to the fact that, in American TV, on cable news, you don't watch news to be informed but to be affirmed. You just want to hear your own views coming back. They were just columnists who were spouting every day their detestation of Donald Trump. There is this talk of vengeance that Donald Trump is going to go after the media and certain figures in the media. And if it's that they've gone to Mar-a-Lago because they're a little bit scared of what the consequences of a Trump second term would be.
So you just say publish and be damned, basically. Just come after us.
If this
I mean,
is what
if they got
believe,
taken off air by him, that would probably be the best thing that ever happened commercially to them, right? I mean, in a way.
Well, look, Morning Joe is very particular fare. It's for a liberal audience. They get what they want. They hear Mika and Joe slagging off Donald Trump in quite a sophisticated way, in quite an articulate, engaging way. They've got a panel of people who will all pile in as well. But that's what the show is. And it just seems that after 8 years of this kind of unremitting fare of Trump hostility, for them to be going to Mar-a-Lago and saying, hey, Don, it's great to see you again. Can we rebuild the relationship? Does strike you as a bit odd.
We don't know what they said to him. Maybe they just went and called him Hitler to his face. You just don't know.
I'm doubting.
Yeah, okay. The ultimate arbiter on this is going to be Jon Stewart. This is his take.
Mika Brzezinski Scarborough, who famously warned of the growing threat of Trump's fascism, also had an interesting announcement to make.
Last Thursday, we expressed our own concerns on this broadcast and even said we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with the president-elect himself. On Friday, we were given the opportunity to do just that. And for those asking why we would go speak to the president-elect during such fraught times, especially between us, I guess I would ask back, why wouldn't we?
Because you said he was Hitler.
Yeah, I mean, there you have it. Why wouldn't you? But we're not in that position.
Is there anyone you wouldn't have on this show?
I think there are people you wouldn't have on the show because you would think you're never going to get a straight answer from them, and it just becomes pointless.
I agree with that.
I interviewed Steve Bannon when I was at the BBC on the Mexican border, and
you got a lot of
I got a lot of for it. And initially, I thought we've got to hear alternative viewpoints. He's a significant player, and then at the end, the more time went on, I thought actually it was a pointless process because I didn't get anything like the real Steve Bannon, which is much more nuanced and much more interesting, and he was just being a propagandist. And I thought, why would you put on someone if they're just a propagandist?
So the task for us, and I think it's a really interesting one, this is we are going to now be hearing from guests who very, very firmly believe conspiracy views, and if they are going to be part of the next administration, like Mehmet Oz, who's kind of peddling the hydroxychloroquine, all the rest of it. If they're going to be peddling conspiracy views, do you want them on your podcast? Not really. But if they are going to be part of the conversation of the next administration, do you need to let people understand what their views are up to a point? I mean, you probably do.
Yes.
Right? And so, I found myself last week having to sort of check out what is gain of function theory, the Dr. Fauci conspiracy. What is atrazine, this drug that RFK thinks is the root to all evil? And I slightly resent that, actually. I slightly resent having to get up to date on other people's conspiracy theories just to feel part of the conversation of the incoming administration. But to some extent, you kind of have to know what they're talking about.
But we have to know what they're talking about and understand where they're coming from to maybe just unpick some of it and show it up to the light, hold these ideas up to scrutiny so that we can say, well, look, there is fairness in that, or this is absurd. That is a journalist's job, to go after the truth, because the truth is a stubborn little thing that exists. And it's our job to find that out. And therefore, we've got to engage to some extent with all sorts of viewpoints.
Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking to the man who, in some senses, was the biggest influence this side of the pond on JD Vance, who's going to be the US Vice President. His name is James Orr. He's an associate professor from Cambridge, And we have a chat with him about how that friendship developed.
Well, we're joined now by James Orr, and he's an associate professor of philosophy of religion at Cambridge University, and he chairs the Edmund Burke Foundation, influential right-wing thinker. And I think what we're really interested in this interview is your relationship with JD Vance, the vice president-elect, who you have grown close to. How do you and JD Vance know each other, and how did you come to be so close?
I've known JD since, gosh, I think about 2018, 2019. We met through mutual friends. We had a lot of things in common. He was a private citizen at the time, so we didn't actually talk politics that much to start with, but we had a lot of common interests. He had a fascinating background. Of course, I read Hillbilly Elegy in 2016 when it came out. A friend of mine interviewed him, and that interview turned out to have a kind of a catalytic effect on the success of that book. And so he'd been on my radar for quite a while. And that book, I remember a Texan friend of mine who was not at all a fan of Donald Trump. They were sort of part of the GOP complex, pressing that book into my hands and saying, when nobody really believed it, Trump's going to win, and this is why. If you want to understand why he's going to win, this is how to understand flyover country and those disaffected swathes of the American electorate that propelled Trump to office in 2016.
And I suppose my question would be: have you influenced his thinking, or has he influenced yours?
I would say he is his own man entirely. In fact, I've learned a great deal more from him, I think, than he's learned from me. But I would say he's very interested in Britain. He's interested in Europe. He was interested in the phenomenon of Brexit and the extent to which it was and wasn't a helpful analogy for understanding what happened in America in 2016. We had lunch back in July, actually just a few days before he was invited to be the VP nominee, and all he really wanted to talk about was the UK election and what had happened, what was happening on the right, what was happening on the left, what Sturm was like, what David Lammy was like. She seemed to have quite a high regard for our new foreign secretary. So he's very curious about the world. I mean, he is an intellectual. I mean, he reads very widely, he reads very deeply. He reads, very, very widely in the classical canon. He's very interested in theology. He's interested in philosophy, the sort of work I'm engaged in here in Cambridge. And so we talk a lot about those issues. Whether anything I've said has ever rubbed off on him, I don't know.
Well, let me just run one thing past you, which might have rubbed off on him. Because he said that Britain has become, quote, the first truly Islamist country that will get a nuclear weapon now that Labour is in power. Did you influence him to say that?
I certainly didn't. And it's important to provide the context to that remark. I was present when he made it. It was a joke delivered at an after-dinner speech at the end of a conference in Washington in July. Odd
joke, isn't it?
No, I don't think it was, in fact. I mean,
what, to the country that you have a special relationship with, you say that Britain has become an Islamist country with a nuclear weapon?
No, he said he was joking with a friend that that the UK may well be, when asked, when discussing which Islamist power would be the first to have a nuclear capacity, he or his interlocutor said Britain. And it was a wry joke. It was clearly intended as humorous. And as with a lot of the humor that comes from Team Trump, it does have a serious point. I think it's directionally true. Of course,
what does that
it's
mean?
not.
What does it mean when you say directionally true?
Well, look, the essence of humor is to exaggerate an underlying phenomenon that is maybe not plausibly true at the moment, but may one day be true in the distant future. Is it the case that Britain's going to become the first Islamist state with a nuclear weapon tomorrow? Of course not. And that was only the most humorless professional offense taker would interpret that remark literally. But is it true, as he's well aware, that British Muslims joined ISIS at twice the rate that they joined the British Army? Yes. Is it true that of the 43,000 people on the MI5 terror watch lists, 35,000 are Muslims? Yes. Is it true that of 80 prescribed terrorist organizations in Britain, 57 are Islamic? Yes. So Vance's after-dinner joke was directionally true in that sense. We are seeing levels of Islamic sectarianism. It should worry all of us. It's certainly shocking to most Americans. The joke was funny for the same reason that most jokes are funny, because it exaggerated something real.
And did it pick up on your own fears, James? I mean, this came out of a conversation that you'd had with him, we understand, sort of after the results of the UK election, when we had those 5 new pro-Gaza independents. Was that something that you had articulated to him was a very real fear for you and your cohort here?
No, that was misreported. I wasn't the interlocutor that he was referring to when he made the joke. I did point out that 5 independents had been elected broadly on a Gaza ticket, and I said that was a striking and unprecedented electoral development that was worthy of note. I also pointed out the election of the 5 Reform MPs. He was very interested to learn about that. But I didn't offer any normative judgment about it. I just simply conveyed that to him as a striking feature of the election in the UK when he asked about it.
Vance is clearly a smart guy, Yale educated, intellectual. You say, he's a reader, he's a thinker. When you look at some of his earlier impressions of Trump, and this is stuff that, I don't think you'd throw away as a joke. You'd say he said all those things in good faith, whether he called Trump reprehensible or America's Hitler, called himself a never Trump guy. He talked about him being heroin. I can totally understand that somebody can go on a political journey and change their mind. But I guess there's lots of people, here and in the US who think that was quite a U-turn. And maybe the real Vance never stopped thinking that stuff. He just found it politically expedient to forget it. I mean, is the Vance the one who believed the first stuff or the second stuff, do you think?
The Vance I know is the person who recognizes that the willingness to change one's mind is the only sure sign that one's got one, and that when the facts change, one's mind should change. Very, very few people in 2016 thought that Trump was the harbinger of anything positive for the right. And I think over the course of the first administration and the successes which Vance believed that administration brought with it, he began to change his mind. And
actually, he said some of this stuff in 2017. So that was when Trump was already president. Not the quotes that I just read you, but some of
it was the first few months. It was the first few months of the administration when he was a private citizen. And I should note that I don't think it's fair to hold a public figure when he was a private citizen to remarks he made in private WhatsApp communications, which were then, or DM messages on Twitter that were then lifted and immediately fed into the Democratic electoral campaign literature. And so I think what one will say in private to a friend, to a particular friend with who one has a particular relationship with, is not. I don't think it's fair to.
Oh yeah, don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to do a gotcha. Isn't this hypocritical? I'm just saying that you've known him over these years, and I'm genuinely interested to try and understand whether there is a bit of him that would still think this, or maybe there's a bit of you that would still understand where he was coming from on this, or whether he both buy into the product that is Trump now.
I've certainly never heard him speak critically of Trump. I mean, he evaluates everything. He sifts through everything. And he, like any sensible politician in the States, recognizes that when you're talking about a president, you're not talking about your pastor, and you're not talking necessarily about a person. You're talking about an administration. You're talking about a team. And that's especially the case, I think, with this incoming administration. And in 2016, I think it was probably fair to evaluate the prospects of Trump 1.0 by reference to his character and his political outlook, such as it was in 2016, an outlook that clearly resonated with the electorate then. I think now it's very different. I think now it's quite clear that we're not talking about Trump. We're talking about Trumpism. We're talking about a genuinely new alternative for the right in the United States that transcends the sort of tired debates between big state and small state and market and state. And so we're seeing something genuinely new evolving in terms of a new intellectual outlook for the right. Is it the case that, Trump has been leading that sort of that intellectual development? No, I think he's a politician who's operated from gut instincts, and JD's view was that those instincts proved to be correct.
Yeah. So is JD Vance then the intellectual underpinning of the Trump gut?
In some respects, I think he probably is. But if you just look at the cabinet that Trump has begun to assemble, it's very hard to say that Vance is sort of driving this intellectually. You've got actually a very wide diversity of views. In fact, most of them are former Democrats. If you look at Ramaswamy, you look at Musk, you look at RFK Jr., you look at Tulsi Gabbard, really you could say that the election this year was a conflict between the Democrat Party of the 1990s and the Democrat Party of the 2020s.
I suppose I'm struck by the dissonance, James, between what you have described as the sort of spiritually led conversations, his journey towards Catholicism, kind of intellectually high-minded stuff, and JD Vance is the guy who talks about childless cat ladies, which seemed to a lot of people offensive. Now, even if you just say, well, it may have been phrased offensively, but it underlines a serious point, an awful lot of people would say, well, hang on, you can't start discriminating against people because they haven't had or couldn't have children.
I don't think he intended to discriminate against people who don't have children. That remark was made, 3 years ago in a TV interview.
Was it okay?
I think it's a totally normal kind of sort of rhetoric that you would find in the cut and thrust of political debate. I don't think it's anything nearly as bad as Hillary Clinton dismissing half of the electorate as a basket of the deplorables, or Joe Biden saying that anyone voting for Trump was garbage. And I don't think that comes anywhere close to that.
No, so, let's not do them. Let's leave Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden's comments to one side. I'm not talking about that. Is it okay to say because she has not got children, that she is a childless cat lady?
That's not what he said at all. It was not in reference to Kamala Harris. It was in reference to, it was a sort of very stereotypical, satirical way of referring to a particular demographic that he had in mind. It was done 3 years before Harris was even running. It's not fair of you.
He did name check her, and he name checked Pete Buttigieg. I mean, this isn't to try and get you to be a spokesman for Vance, but it does tell us about his policies, because I think those policies, those beliefs haven't changed. He is natalist, and the point he was making in that podcast was that he felt those people without children were less vested, less patriotic, less vested in America's future. And he's also expressed this belief that childlessness is linked to sociopathy. He's advocated at one stage that parents should have more voting power than non-parents. And so I guess I'm asking you, it all adds up. It's not just a joke, is it? It adds up to a sense of his belief, which I'm interrogating with you. I think it's interesting, and I want to know if it's a belief that also exists here.
Well, the question of the demographic twilight that is a spectre that's beginning to haunt the whole world. I mean, there are very, very few parts of the world now that are not looking at a collapse in their total fertility rates. And I think JD and others have begun to see that this is actually a real issue. It's a desperately difficult and neuralgic issue to debate politically, because no government, no politician, left or right, wants to tell people how to live their lives or whether they should have children or how many children they should have. But I think there is a policy debate to be had as to whether or not parenthood, motherhood, fatherhood is properly incentivized in the fiscal system, is properly incentivized in
But he wasn't saying that. I mean, I know he's talked about tax credits, but he wasn't saying that there. He was saying that Kamala Harris would make a bad leader. Pete Buttigieg, who actually, does have children of his own, would make a bad leader because they didn't have a nuclear or a normative family that would see America into its future. And I don't know. I mean, is that the kind of thing you'd pick up with him, or,
No. No. I think he's somebody who thinks that the family is important, that it's the bedrock of any flourishing society, that government should be interested in laying down the enabling conditions for citizens to have families if they want one, and to make it easier for people to have children and to bring up their children as they see fit, whether it's in a normative arrangement, whether it's in a sort of standard arrangement or not. And I don't see anything wrong with that. That's been a bread and butter issue on the right for decades.
So do you think whatever that form of Trumpism, let's call it new conservatism or I don't know, left conservatism, I don't know what the name for it is, do you think it's coming here, James?
I think it's unlikely. The American electorate is a very, very different kind of electorate from the British electorate. I think the results from July's UK election don't really tell us anything one way or the other. I suppose the 4 million plus voters who swung behind reform would share more with the sort of Trump 2.0 movement than with the Tories in their under the sort of current dispensation. But no, I don't think it's very likely at the moment that there's any sort of Trump-like figure or Trump-like ideology on the horizon of the British political landscape.
James Orr, fantastic to speak to you. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving us your time.
Thank
really
you very
good.
much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So look, he clearly has an influence on JD Vance. JD Vance has come to this as someone who was very much America-based his whole life. He wants to find out about the world. He also wants to discuss his intellectual ideas. And James Orr fits the bill perfectly on both counts, on kind of conservative ideas and also on what is happening in the UK. And he's clearly a figure who is influencing some of the thinking. And maybe listening to that interview, you would think apologist for as well, to some extent, as some of the views that
James... I don't know. I heard something very different. I heard from James the sense that whatever JD Vance thinks and performs to in America is not yet a movement that is going to have roots here. And I think that's genuinely interesting because
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah, much of the national debate now is, well, if Trumpism works there, and if Elon Muskism is now global, and if, Twitter is X is, starting to tell Italian politics what to do, and as, Alison Pearson what she can do, then is this now a global movement? And I thought what was very interesting was James Orr's resistance to that. There isn't a Trump figure here. There isn't an obvious explanation from the last election result that is coming here. Although, we're all looking to see what is beneath the waves of these results, what is beneath the waves of the movements that we're starting to see here that haven't yet maybe taken hold.
And I think what he's interested in is the elements. Apparently, JD Vance was fascinated looking at the UK general election about the fact that, Corbyn and pro-Gaza people had done well, and equally that Reform had done well, and the sort of splitting of conventional left and conventional right. And what's happened in America, of course, is that Donald Trump has completely reshaped the Republican Party and taken it to a whole new different place. It's getting support where it didn't get it before. And I think that people on the right are wondering, of course, in the wake of the catastrophic election defeat in July, whether that path is open for them as well.
And does the Conservative right here, the Conservative Party, become the now defunct old Republican Party, or do they now reinvent themselves as the newer, sexier British MAGA? Yeah. Well, before we go, a little update on the incoming president's whereabouts. Donald Trump tweeted a while ago he was heading to the great state of Texas to watch the launch of the largest object ever to be elevated.
And early next year, we understand that one of Donald Trump's first trips as President of the United States will be to watch another elevation, this time of a golf ball in Scotland. So one of the first presidential acts will be to go to Downing Street. No, maybe not. Buckingham Palace? Probably not. No.
State visit.
Turnberry Golf Course, or Aberdeen, where he's got a golf course and he's hoping to build another one.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. I was there with him on the 9th tee, the lighthouse hole at Turnberry, when Donald Trump came the day after Brexit.
I was there with his sons, who were wearing tartan. This was before he was president, when the golf club was just going through, and they were very keen to stress their
Scottish
roots. Exactly. We'll be back next week.
The Newsagents USA.